In Mark 1:38, we saw that Jesus is done preaching in Capernaum. He already preached in their synagogue, has driven spirits, evil spirits, out of people. He has healed a lot of people that came to Peter's house. Now it's time to move on to the other villages in Galilee, around the Lake of Galilee. Today we're going to explore Mark 139, and we're going to end up commenting on why such a simple action of Jesus, go preaching in all the other synagogues in Galilee, is actually something that is very hard for a Calvinist to explain. All right, let's read Mark 1:39. Kai elsen kerusen estas synagogas auton, eis holeten Galilean, kai ta daimonia ekbalan. Now, every single word in this verse we have already seen before. So, from a grammatical point of view, there's not much that I need to say. We're going to go over this verse very quickly. Also, the construction is pretty simple. There is the verb elsen, which is the principal verb, and then there are two participles. The first one, kerusen, and the other one, which is ekbalan, okay, another participle, connected to the subject of the sentence, which is Jesus. All right. And these two participles are connected by this conjunction kai. Then we have these prepositional phrases here, eis ta synagogas auton, which is to where Jesus is going, the place where Jesus is going. We did a further specification, eis holeten Galilean, again, same construction, eis, two prepositional phrase to specify exactly where Jesus is going now after he's done preaching in Capernaum. And then the second part, the second participle, which holds this ta daimonia, which is the object, the direct object of the verb. So very simple from a grammatical point of view, very simple in terms of words, terms used. And so let's jump into the translation. So the principal verb, elsen, we've seen it many times. This is the aorist tense of the verb erchomai. Okay, the verb erchomai, which means to go or to come. Okay, in this case is to go. So, and he went. And he went. Doing what? Well, these are the two actions. Kerusen kai ekbalan. Now, kerusen comes from the verb keruso. We've seen it in the past. The verb keruso is a very important one because it indicates the preaching of the good news, the preaching of the gospel, okay? The proclamation, okay? So it means to proclaim, like a herald that is bringing good news, good tidings. So, and he went preaching, so preaching the gospel, estas synagogas. Now, this prepositional phrase, we've seen it many times. You have the preposition eis, which indicates a movement into a place, okay? And eis wants the accusative case. And in fact, you get it here, us, us. This is feminine plural type of accusative. Tas is the definite article, the, and synagogas are the synagogues. We've seen this term many times. So, and he went preaching into, meaning that he would enter into the synagogues, auton. Now, auton, this ending omega nu indicates a genitive plural, and autos, we've seen it, is a personal pronoun in the third person plural, so them. Okay, in the genitive is of them, right? And he went preaching into the synagogues of them. Them who? Well, we need to go back to verse 138 to understand what Mark is talking about here. But basically, Jesus in the previous verse is saying it's time to go into the other villages. All right. So these are the synagogues of those villages. of them, of those villages, in their synagogues. All right. So the first part of the verse says, and he went preaching in their synagogues. And then Mark adds some more specification on exactly where he went, which synagogues he entered. And guess what? Well, he went to all of them. Okay. Eis Holen ten Galilean. Okay. Same construction, eis, preposition eis, into, and then you have the accusative. Now, this accusative, en, an, okay, this is an accusative in the singular and in the feminine gender. This synagogas was plural. All right. So the difference between as plural and an or en singular. And so as 10 Galilean, we know what that means. It means into Galilee, right? This is Galilean is the region of Galilee. What is this whole land? Is an adjective which means whole, entire, into the entire region of Galilee. So he entered basically all the synagogues in Galilee. All right. And then there is the ending of the verse, which is very simple from a grammatical point of view, where it says that, and not only he was preaching the gospel in all the synagogues, he was also doing something else. He was ekbalon. Now, this verb, we've seen it. It's a composition of two pieces. The verb ballo, which means to throw, and the preposition ek, which means out of. Okay, so it's throwing out of. So driving out is the verb that Mark uses all the time to indicate that action of driving demons, specifically demons, out of people. Okay, and in fact, the object here, ta daimonia, it's a neuter, plural, in the accusative case, because it's the object. He was driving out the demons, or generally demons. Okay. So putting everything together, this verse says that Jesus went preaching the gospel into their synagogues, into the entire region of Galilee, and driving out demons. So there were basically two things that he was doing. He was preaching the gospel and driving out demons. So one was more theoretical, preaching, philosophical, okay, and the other was more practical, healing people from their diseases. Now, let's take a look at all these other villages that Mark is implying here, that Jesus is thinking about, right? What were all these other synagogues around the Lake of Galilee? Well, we know that Jesus was living in Nazareth at that time. Close to Nazareth, we see Cana, where he performed his first miracle. And this whole region, which is highlighted here, is Galilee. And we see that there is a big lake here, this one here, that is called the Sea of Galilee or the Lake of Galilee. And you see all these villages that are on the shore along the Sea of Galilee. And you see, for example, Capernaum, which was one of the very first one that Jesus started preaching from, where supposedly Peter and Andrew were living, and they're having their fishing activities. Now, these other villages are, well, for example, Chorazin, here north of Capernaum, or Magdala, south of Capernaum, where supposedly Mary Magdalene was from. And then you have this Tiberias farther south, or even Bethsaida on the other side of the Sea of Galilee, and so on. Supposedly, Jesus went one by one, and very likely there were many more villages that this map is showing here right now. But I would like you to keep in mind some of these names: Bethsaida, Chorazin, Capernaum. These are all the villages that Jesus said, I need to go there. Why? Because remember Mark 1:38, he said, I came for this. This is the reason why I came for, because I need to preach the gospel, the good news, to all these places, not just Capernaum. Okay, and so I need to go to Chorazin, I need to go to Bethsaida, I need to go to Magdala, I need to go to Tiberias, and so on and so forth. Well, what's the problem with that? Remember when I said that uh, Calvinists wouldn't be able to explain this activity of Jesus? Why wouldn't they? This is such a normal activity. Jesus is just going out and preaching the good news. What's so hard to explain here? Well, let's take a look. Remember, I told you to keep in mind some of the names of these villages, like Capernaum, Chorazin, Bethsaida. These names will appear again in another passage of the Gospels, particularly in Matthew chapter 11, verses 20 to 24. And it's not a nice passage. Jesus is very upset, and he's very upset with these very villages. Hear what he says. Then he began to reproach the cities in which most of his deeds of power had been done. Why? Because they did not repent. Woe to you, says Jesus, Chorazin. Woe to you, Bethsaida. For if the deeds of power done in you had been done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes. But I tell you, on the day of judgment, it will be more tolerable for Tyre and Sidon than for you. And then he moves on, and you, Capernaum, will you be exalted to heaven? No, you will be brought down to Hades, to hell. For if the deeds of power done in you had been done in Sodom, it would have remained until this day. But I tell you that on the day of judgment, it will be more tolerable for the land of Sodom than for you. So here you have them: Chorazin, Bethsaida, Capernaum, all these villages, which were the very first villages that Jesus visited, preaching the gospel and driving out demons and doing all these deeds of power. Matthew calls them deeds of power, which is healing and driving out demons. These very villages did not repent, did not accept him. They rejected him. They did not believe. They did not repent. Now, let's put all these things together. Let's go back now to Mark 138, 139. Jesus says, I came for this. I need to go on to the other villages in Galilee. And in Mark 39, we just saw it, Jesus started entering all the synagogues of all the villages in Galilee, preaching the gospel and driving out demons, performing these deeds of power Matthew's talking about in chapter 11. And guess what? These very villages, after Jesus preached the gospel and healed all these people, driving out demons, did not repent, were not saved. Well, Jesus says, you, Chorazin, you, Bethsaida, you, Capernaum, at the day of judgment, you are going to go down to Hades. You're going to go to hell. He's already foreseeing their final judgment. These cities did not repent, therefore they will be damned to hell. Why this is very problematic for a Calvinist? Well, if you're not familiar with the Calvinist doctrine, one of the five foundational doctrine of Calvinism is the so-called unconditional election, which is tied to the very first point, which is total depravity. So in the Calvinist theology, there is the original sin that brought that threw man into this condition, which is total depravity. So impossibility for a person, for a human being, not to sin. So we live, before being saved by God, we live in sin. We are not able not to sin. We're not able to exercise our free will to um, abstain from sinning, and so we live in the death of sin. We are dead. We are dead in sin. We are condemned. So we are just basically walking toward hell. Hell is our natural destination. And then what happens? Well, there is this unconditional election. So God, from his sovereignty, he decides that he's going to save the elects. So he decides that out of this mass of people that are damned and they're just walking toward the abyss of hell, he's going to pluck some out of this and save them. Why? Based on what criteria? It's not up to us to know. God just does that. And there's nothing the people that are saved that they can do to be saved. God, out of his own wisdom, is going to pluck some out and save them. That's it. And that has nothing to do with, absolutely zero to do with any merits of those people. Why? Because everybody has no merits in the Calvin theology. We're totally depraved people, just dead in sin. And so God just decides that he's going to save some of those. This is the so-called unconditional election doctrine in Calvinism, which is connected with this idea of double predestination. Now, double predestination means that God, before the creation of the universe, he had already decided which people he would save and which people he would damn. Let me repeat this. Before the creation of the universe, God already decided which people he would be saving and which people he would damn. Okay? The so-called reprobate. So these people God created basically to damn them. And there's nothing, absolutely nothing they can possibly do to revert this. It was an unconditional decision of God before the creation of man. This sounds pretty harsh, doesn't it? Well, I don't want to enter the theological framework of this type of doctrines. I just want to try to overimpose this framework onto this passage that we just read. If it's true that God, from the very beginning, before the creation of man, already decided which one he's going to save and which one he's going to damn, the passage that we read in Matthew, together with the passage that we read in Mark, this triangulating all these three, do they make sense? Do they get together well? Or do you see any contradiction there? Well, what did we see in Mark 1:39? Well, we saw that Jesus says, I need to go to all these cities to preach the gospel and to drive out demons. And then we know that after he has preached the gospel in all these cities, none of them repented. And guess what? Jesus says, at the day of judgment, you're all going to go to hell. Well, how can possibly a Calvinist explain this dynamic? If Jesus, who's God incarnate, had already decided from the very beginning, before even the creation of the universe, which people he would save and which people he would damn, why would Jesus even bother to go preach the gospel to these people? One, he already knew that they would not repent. But even worse than that, Jesus, God, created those people in those villages already for damnation. What's the point for Jesus going there in those villages of those people full of reprobates that he had already decided would go to hell, try to convince them to repent? Of course, that would never happen. He already decided that they would never repent, and he had already decided that eventually they would go to hell. How can you possibly explain the fact that Jesus is getting super upset at these cities? Woe to you, Chorazin! Woe to you, Bethsaida! And you, Capernaum! Why is he even upset? He already decided, according to the Calvinist theology, from the very beginning that these very villages would go to hell. Why is he so surprised? Why is he so upset at them? Makes no sense. And this, as many other passages, but this is one that is usually overlooked, to me, is something that cannot be possibly explained by Calvinist theology. It flies in the face of unconditional election and proves Calvinism wrong.